Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I'm a 49-year-old woman who's been dealing with severe arthritis throughout most of my body for the past 15 years. It started gradually in my early 30s, but by the time I hit 40, it had become debilitating. Add to that multiple surgeries, back surgery to fix a herniated disc and knee surgery after a fall. And you can imagine what my mobility looks like these days. Walking more than room to room in my house is impossible now. The pain just becomes too much to bear. My husband, who's 8 years younger than me, has been my rock through all of this. He's the one who convinced me to get a motorized wheelchair when my condition worsened to the point where I couldn't push a manual one anymore due to the arthritis in my arms. Living in rural Western Australia means we don't get out much, but when we do, it's always an adventure. People here dress however they want. You might see someone in full business attire right next to someone wearing nothing but shorts and a singlet. It's just how it is out here. 2 weeks ago, my husband and I needed to do our grocery shopping. It was a regular Tuesday afternoon and the store wasn't too crowded. As usual, I was getting the typical comments and stares about my motorized wheelchair. I've learned to tune them out over the years. I asked my husband if he could grab some cereal from the top shelf. He agreed and asked whether I wanted the regular one or the whole grain. Before I could answer him, I noticed this older man stumbling down the aisle. He wasn't wearing any shoes, and the smell of alcohol was strong enough that I could catch a whiff even from several feet away. He stopped dead in his tracks when he saw my wheelchair. The drunk man started commenting on my wheelchair, calling it a beauty and wondering aloud why he was using his legs when he could be riding around in style like me. I usually ignore comments like these, but something in me snapped that day. Maybe it was the way he said it, or maybe it was just years of bottled-up frustration finally coming to the surface. I asked him if he would like the disability that goes with it. His bloodshot eyes widened and his mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. He stammered out a no and some unintelligible sounds before practically sprinting away. Quite impressive for someone who could barely walk straight a moment ago. When he disappeared around the corner, I heard a quiet laugh behind me. A young woman in her 20s had been pretending not to listen to the whole exchange. She complimented my response, saying it was brilliant and that some people should know when to keep their mouths shut. I thanked her, admitting that sometimes I just can't help myself. She insisted it was perfect, sharing that her aunt uses a wheelchair too, and people are always making stupid comments like that. After we finished our shopping and got home, I confessed to my husband that I felt a bit bad about being so sharp with the drunk man. He told me not to feel bad, saying that sometimes people need a reality check and that I was actually nicer than he would have been. When I expressed concern about being unusually confrontational, he suggested that maybe I should be, reminding me that I've put up with enough nonsense over the years. He was right. Since my condition started, I've dealt with endless comments, unsolicited advice, and even accusations of faking it because you don't look disabled. People have told me I just need to exercise more, try this miracle cure, or that their cousin's neighbor's dog's previous owner had arthritis and cured it by drinking special tea. But that interaction with the drunk man changed something in me. For once, instead of smiling politely or pretending I didn't hear, I stood up for myself. Well, technically I sat down for myself, but you know what I mean. The next time I went shopping, someone actually tried to tell me I was lucky to have a motorized wheelchair because their legs get so tired walking around the store. I responded by asking if they'd like to trade places, offering to take their functioning joints in exchange for my chronic pain and disability. They quickly walked away, and I noticed that same young woman from before was there again, giving me a thumbs up from the end of the aisle. She called out that I was becoming quite the local hero and told me she'd shared my story with her aunt, who planned to use the same line when people made stupid comments to her. Now, 2 weeks later, I'm still riding the high of finally speaking up for myself. It might seem like a small thing to most people, but after years of staying quiet and taking other people's thoughtless comments, It feels like I've finally found my voice. My husband says he's proud of me, and honestly, I'm proud of myself too. I've been a wrestling referee for almost 15 years now. Started right after college when my own wrestling career ended due to a knee injury. The sport had given me so much throughout my high school and college years that I wanted to stay involved somehow. Refereeing seemed like the perfect way to do it. Last weekend, I was officiating a high school wrestling tournament. It was a pretty big deal. Regional championships with spots at the state tournament on the line. I'd done this tournament for the past 5 years, and while parents can get heated, I'd never experienced anything like what happened that day. I was assigned to referee the 145-pound weight class semifinals. One of the wrestlers was this scrawny kid whose father I'd noticed being extremely vocal throughout the earlier matches. Even during his kid's quarterfinal match, he'd been screaming about every call, but the referee handling that match had managed to keep things under control. The semifinal match started normally enough. Both wrestlers were technically sound, but the scrawny kid was clearly less experienced than his opponent. His opponent was scoring points through clean takedowns and near falls, all completely legitimate moves. That's when the father started getting louder. He began yelling about the garbage calls I was making and questioned if I was blind. I gave him a warning look, which is usually enough to calm most parents down. Not this guy. He continued shouting, claiming his kid had clearly reversed the takedown and that I was robbing him. The thing is, his kid hadn't reversed anything. He was simply being outmatched by a more experienced wrestler. By the second period, the score was 8-2, all legitimate points. Then came the moment that changed everything. The opposing wrestler executed a perfect double-leg takedown. The scrawny kid, in his desperation, grabbed his opponent's headgear, which is illegal and results in a penalty point. I had to call it. The father exploded, screaming that the match was rigged. He started marching toward the mat. I immediately stopped the match and stood up, telling him he needed to return to the spectator area immediately. He responded by accusing me of being against his kid the whole match and giving away points to the other wrestler. I gave him his final warning, telling him to return to his seat or he'd be asked to leave the gymnasium. That's when he got right in my face. I could smell the coffee on his breath. He started yelling that I couldn't tell him what to do and that his kid deserved to go to state. His kid, meanwhile, was standing on the mat looking mortified. The other coaches had started moving toward us, seeing the situation escalating. I tried to tell him he was done and needed to exit, but I didn't get to finish my sentence. He shoved me hard, catching me off guard. I fell backward onto the mat, hitting my head pretty hard. The gym went silent for a split second before erupting in chaos. Two coaches immediately tackled the father to the ground while he was trying to come at me again. The athletic director, who thankfully had already called security when he saw the father approaching the mat, arrived with two police officers who had been stationed outside the gym for the tournament. The father was still yelling as they restrained him, screaming about how I was corrupt and ruining his kid's future. The officers didn't waste any time. They cuffed him right there on the wrestling mat while his kid watched, completely horrified. Turns out this wasn't his first incident. The athletic director later told me he'd been banned from 2 other school districts for similar aggressive behavior at sporting events. He was charged with assault and disorderly conduct. The district attorney's office decided to make an example of him since attacks on sports officials had been increasing in our state. He ended up getting 6 months in jail, 3 years probation, and a lifetime ban from attending any high school sporting events in the state. His kid was actually pretty talented, just needed more experience. But after that incident, I heard he quit wrestling altogether. Couldn't handle the embarrassment of what his father had done. The tournament committee decided to let his opponent advance by default, which was the right call. The kid went on to place 3rd at state. While I got to tell this story to every new referee, I train as a cautionary tale about parent behavior. I still see that father's kid sometimes. He helps coach middle school wrestling now. We've never talked about that day, but he always gives me a respectful nod when our paths cross. I think he's trying to be the positive adult influence in young wrestlers' lives that his father never was. I've always been close to my parents. They're the kind of people who go above and beyond for family, especially during holidays. For years, they've been the ones hosting both Thanksgiving and Christmas gatherings. Dad's side would come for Christmas every year, while Mom's side would rotate for Thanksgiving. Their house became the gathering spot for both sides of the family, and honestly, they were great at it. My parents would transform their decent-sized house into this perfect holiday setting. We're talking about deep cleaning every corner, both living rooms, upstairs and down, dining room, kitchen, laundry room, bathrooms, and even this platform upstairs where I keep my nutcracker collection. Most people can't even see the whole platform except from the upstairs living room, but Mom and Dad would clean it anyway. That's just how thorough they are. About 5 years ago, they decided to stop hosting Thanksgiving. It was getting to be too much. The cleaning alone would take several hours, and that's with all of us pitching in. Now that I've moved out and my sister's away on a cruise, until after New Year's, it's even harder for them. This year, my parents planned a smaller Christmas gathering. They just wanted to invite Dad's mom, my two aunts, let's call them the first aunt and second aunt, second aunt's husband, their kid, my cousin, and me. Simple, right? Well, that's when the drama started. First aunt, who can't keep anything to herself, told another aunt about the smaller gathering. Suddenly, everyone who found out was angry about not being invited. First aunt even went to my grandmother to complain. When I found out about it, I asked my grandmother why she wasn't coming to Christmas anymore. She told me that after hearing about the small gathering from first aunt, she didn't want to be involved in any of the drama. Here's the thing. First aunt is just being petty because her kids weren't invited. I'm pretty sure the only reason she was invited in the first place was because of transportation logistics. See, I like staying at my parents' house longer since I don't see them often, but my grandmother always wants to leave right after the food is served. This actually happened on Thanksgiving when I was doing laundry at their house. I don't have a washer and dryer. While I was still working on my second load, my grandmother kept asking when we were leaving. When I told her I still needed to finish the load, she put on her coat and told me to hurry up. I had to remind her that I wasn't even done with the first load yet. My mom wanted to send an apologetic text to everyone who wasn't invited, but I had different ideas. I suggested that she tell them if they wanted a big family gathering so badly, they could host it themselves, since she and Dad were tired of cleaning up their mess alone after putting in all the effort to host. Dad disagreed, saying we shouldn't even suggest that. If they wanted to host, they would have offered by now, and we should just ignore them. Mom still thought about explaining why they weren't hosting everyone, but I reminded her that these people don't even keep in touch after the holidays and don't deserve an explanation. We weren't supposed to know that anyone was upset about it. First aunt would apparently throw a fit if she found out we knew she was complaining. She's my grandmother's ride to various appointments, like getting her hair done, so everyone's walking on eggshells around her. Well, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I created a family group chat excluding first aunt and shared some photos from previous gatherings. I pointed out how my parents spent hours cleaning before and after, while certain people, with time-stamped photos as proof, left without helping. I mentioned how some family members only reach out during holidays expecting to be hosted and fed, but never offer to help or host themselves. The response was immediate. Several family members apologized to my parents, and 3 of them offered to host future gatherings. First aunt eventually found out and tried to defend herself, but nobody was buying it. My grandmother finally stood up to her and found another ride for her appointments. Turns out second aunt lives closer anyway and was happy to help. My parents had their small, peaceful Christmas gathering just as planned, and now hosting duties are being shared among multiple family members, exactly as they should have been all along. I lost my mom when I was 7 years old to breast cancer. The battle was long and brutal, but she fought until the very end with a smile on her face. Even during her final days in the hospital, she'd always make sure to ask me about school and help me with my homework. She was that kind of person, always putting others before herself. After she passed, my dad and I developed this weekly ritual of visiting her grave every Sunday. We'd bring fresh flowers, clean her headstone, and just talk to her about our week. My dad would tell her about work and I'd tell her about school. It became our way of keeping her memory alive and staying connected as a family. This incident happened when I was in 8th grade, right around Mother's Day. I was sitting at my usual lunch table, quietly eating my sandwich while this kid, let's call him the class show-off, was going on and on about the expensive Mother's Day gift he'd bought. The class show-off was bragging about buying his mom a designer purse she'd been wanting. He made sure everyone knew it had cost him $300 from his savings, emphasizing how his mom totally deserved it. His friend merely commented on how nice that was, but the show-off wasn't done. He went on about how getting expensive gifts was the least anyone could do for the woman who gave them life. He kept bragging about how his mom was going to be so impressed and how no one else probably did anything as thoughtful. I wasn't really paying attention, just focused on finishing my lunch so I could head to the library before next period. But then he turned his attention to me. With a smug look on his face, he asked me what I'd done for my mom, immediately following up with his assumption that I probably hadn't gotten her anything at all. He looked like he'd just caught me being a terrible person. I remember feeling a mix of sadness and irritation, not because of his assumption, but because he felt entitled to use Mother's Day as some sort of competition. I looked him straight in the eyes and kept my voice steady as I told him that I had indeed gotten something for my mom, her favorite white lilies, and that I visited her grave with them, just like I did every week. The cafeteria seemed to go completely silent, although it was probably just our table. The show-off's face turned red, and he started stammering. He demanded to know why I hadn't mentioned this earlier, as if I owed him this personal information. When I pointed out that it wasn't a competition, he got defensive, insisting that I should have told him sooner and questioning how he was supposed to know. I simply responded that this was exactly why he shouldn't make assumptions about people's lives. He got up from the table and practically ran away. His friends looked uncomfortable, and one of them actually apologized to me before they all left. The next few days, he avoided making eye contact with me in the hallways. Whenever we had to be at the same table during lunch, he'd suddenly become very interested in his food and wouldn't say a word. The bragging stopped too, at least when I was around. The following Sunday, as I was placing fresh lilies on my mom's grave, I noticed someone had already left a small bouquet of daisies there. I never found out if it was him, but the timing seemed too coincidental. Maybe he did learn something that day after all. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.